Welcome, everyone. I appreciate your turning up for this now third session of our Ask the Editors series. I'm Morris Allen from Metaphorosis, which is both a weekly magazine and a small press. I'd ask you to keep yourselves, you're all started muted. I'd ask you to keep yourselves muted until you're actually talking, just to minimize the risk of confusion. As I was telling our other panelists, I'm going to have some construction happening at my house, so I will be a little bit less talkative than I might otherwise be, and rely on the other folks to carry the ball a little bit. A few words of introduction. We are going to have these, as you probably know, on a monthly basis. The first Saturday of every month, they rotate between 8 a.m. Pacific time and 5 p.m. Pacific time to allow for some variance in time zones, people in the East, Far East, I guess, to have more access. I'm Morris Allen again from Metaphorosis. We publish science fiction and fantasy stories once a week, as well as monthly print and ebook issues. And I'll give the other folks a chance to introduce themselves, the other panelists a chance to introduce themselves as well, and then we'll leap into your questions. So I'm going to call on people in the order that they show up on my screen. So Holly.
Hi, I'm Holly Lynn Walrath. I am the managing editor of Interstellar Flight Press. We publish small books, so poetry, short story collections, novellas, basically kind of anything that the big five or whatever we're at now don't publish, we're interested in. And we also have an online nonfiction magazine, which is a little bit unique in the SFF sphere, in that it's all essays, interviews, reviews, that kind of stuff. And we do a print anthology of that every year. So that's me. Hi.
Okay, Justine.
Yeah, hi, I'm Justine. I am the editor-in-chief for Android Press, which is the publisher of Solarpunk magazine. So I'm also the co-editor-in-chief of Solarpunk magazine. And there at the magazine, we publish every other month, online only. We don't do print issues. And mostly, very much mostly Solarpunk, as the name suggests, but also like Hope Punk and other sort of like positive, more forward-looking science fiction and fantasy. And then we also do a quarterly microfiction like mini issue with like four really small, like 250 words or less stories that are more like futuristic vignettes. And then at Android Press in general, aside from Solarpunk magazine, we publish science fiction and fantasy novels, novellas. We've got our first comic books coming out later this year and our first RPG games as well.
And last, we have Selena Middleton, who is in the middle of a big storm and so is not on video, but is here with us by phone. Selena.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm so sorry that I can't see you all. Hopefully, I'll be able to stay on the call and participate in the conversation. So I'm Selena Middleton. I am the publisher and editor-in-chief at Stelliform Press. We are a climate fiction / environmental justice press. We're publishing mostly novellas. We had our first novel come out on March 1st. And we are probably going to open for submissions at the end of this year. So hopefully we can talk a little bit about that. So yeah, climate fiction, environmental fiction is our focus.
Okay. Then without further ado, I open the ground to questions from the audience. Those of you who have participated in these before know that I'm pretty informal about this. So no need to raise hands or anything like that. Just go ahead and speak, unless obviously somebody else is speaking. So any starter questions?
I'm curious. Hi, yeah, I noticed a few of your Selena and Justine are you like positive solar fiction, right? I'm curious, just how dark can you get though? Like, does it always have? I mean, it ends on a positive uptick, but can it start dystopian and then work towards utopian?
How much hope does there have to
I'll
be?
take this one.
Selena, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take this one first. I should have mentioned this actually in my introduction. We do publish some horror, and even though we're very welcoming to horror tropes, there does have to be some positivity in the narrative as well. So often our horror is leaning into the idea of transformation rather than apocalypse. The novel that we just published on March 1st was a YA novel from Sim Kern called Seeds for the Swarm. And that one does start off very dystopian and leans heavily into YA dystopian tropes. The main character starts off in a very dystopian world where water is very scarce. A lot of the landscape that you might recognize in the Western United States has been turned into desert. But then it does move in a different direction. It doesn't stay in that kind of environment. And the gist of the story is fighting to change that environment, to fight the forces that are responsible for that dystopian world. So for Stelliform, at least, we are welcoming of darker stories. Apart from dystopia, we do, as I mentioned, welcome just straight horror, but there does have to be some sort of hopeful edge, like something that the reader can hold on to so as to not become too despairing about our situation with the climate. Like, we don't want to drive people into the ground with hopelessness. We want to give them a little bit of a different way of looking at things. We want to acknowledge that people have some pretty scary, depressing feelings about our current situation with the climate. But we want to motivate people and inspire people to think about things differently, not to depress them into inaction.
Justine.
Yeah, at Solarpunk magazine, we really like and make a really strong effort to stay away from stories that are set in like dystopian settings. Like post-apocalyptic is kind of different from dystopian. And that, like, in the post-apocalypse, right, the sort of dystopian authoritarian entity is possibly gone, right? Where if you're in the dystopia, then like you're still kind of under that thumb. So we like to stay away from dystopias, but we also want stories where, you know, the characters have conflict and where everything is not all just like rosy and sort of unrealistic end state societies where nothing can ever get better or improve. Right. I mean, we want realistic stories. So there's certainly an element of darkness that we even like to see in our stories, but they'd certainly have to be kind of wrapped in the sort of more hopeful, like utopian looking, at least like forward looking kind of thing. At Android Press, we'll publish, I mean, pretty much anything as long as it's in the sci-fi fantasy kind of light horror realm. It certainly doesn't have to be hopeful or optimistic.
Okay, great. Other questions? If there aren't any, then I'm going to ask Selena. Selena, you guys published one of the best things I read, certainly in all of last year, which was Arboreality by Rebecca Campbell, which is sad, I think, in some places, but hopeful. And since we have a couple of small presses on the panel today, are you doing this entirely by submission? Do you do any solicitation? And that's for all of you on the small presses. Let's start with Selena.
Actually, Arboreality was solicited by me. I approached Rebecca after I read her story in Clark's World, An Important Failure. It was one of my favorite stories of 2020. I was just absolutely enamored with it. I remember I do a lot of my listening, I listen to a lot of my short stories. So I remember I was walking through the woods with my dog listening to An Important Failure. And when it got to the end of that story, I just sobbed in the middle of the woods. I'm just sobbing. And I was like, this story is amazing. And so I approached Rebecca and I asked her if she was interested in expanding it. And she came up with this brilliant idea to create a novella in a series of interconnected short stories. I believe she called it a fractured novella. And you can see how the idea of fracturing is quite an important one for climate fiction, because climate fiction is fracturing our world. It's compromising our ecosystems. It's changing the way that people connect with each other, the way they connect to their environments. And the structure of that novella is really integral to the message. So I have done a little bit of solicitation, but mostly, I'm just trying to remember if there's any more that I have solicited or if that's the only one. We acquired quite a few of our titles when we opened for submissions last year. I believe we took on 6 at that time. Yeah, I think Arboreality might be the only one. Other than that, I'm really interested in hearing from BIPOC authors, especially LGBTQ to plus authors. I'm really interested in stories from marginalized people. Yeah, so we don't do a lot of solicitation, and we're very open to submissions when we are open, which hopefully will be at the end of the year.
All right, great. Same question for the rest of the panel. So Holly, let's start with you.
Yeah, we do a submission call. We've done one a year for like the past couple of years. And lately I've been sort of focusing on the kind of specific types of things we're looking for. So like we did this last call was a horror novella call. And then before that we did like a writers of color call. And I'm sort of playing around with potentially another one. We'll see. I haven't decided yet what it'll be, or whether it'll be this year or next year. And yeah, but like we do also publish, I don't know if I would call them solicited works, but people pitch me things and I am always interested in that, you know. So if you have something that seems to fit, you know, like with what we're doing, like one of our poetry books that's coming out later this year from Maxwell Gladstone. Max actually came up and pitched me at StokerCon and told me about this poetry book idea, which is all like queer mythology retellings. And I was like, yes, please. So, you know, like if you have a good pitch that fits our, you know, our sort of purview of what we're looking for, I'll always consider it. So a couple of our poetry books have been that way. And then I don't know if we've had any fiction. But yeah, so it's, you know, I'm at cons. When people come up to my table, you know, I'm always welcome to listen. You know, I always want to hear what your ideas are, what you're working on. I'm interested in it because I'm a writer also. But yeah, so it's, I don't know if I would call it specifically soliciting, but it's more like, you know, I'm always open to hear about what people are working on. Yeah.
Okay, great. Justine.
Yeah, we do a combination of the two. At Android Press, we've put out 3 books so far. We're still kind of a baby press, and the second book we put out is called Reliving Mythology, put out by the Voodoo Knots cohort, which is like a all black, sort of modeled on like the Clarion model of sort of science fiction writing education. And so that book was, I reached out to LP Kindred actually, because I'd read a number of his short stories and was interested in trying to get him to work with us at Android Press. And so then he brought the idea of the Voodoo Knots book to us. And in general, if anytime we do anthologies, those are things that we go and kind of solicit ourselves. We generally don't open to submissions for anthologies. And then we've got a novella and an anthology coming out, both by Phoebe Wagner this spring and summer, that were both solicited. Other than that, everything that we're doing has come in through submissions. And the same at the magazine too. It's generally all submissions. If we do solicit, it tends to be more nonfiction, just because we get fewer submissions of nonfiction, and they tend to be not as kind of good quality as the fiction in general. And so every once in a while we have to do some outreach to make sure we fill our nonfiction slots, but we prefer submissions.
Just to answer that question for Metaphorosis, the magazine is entirely submission based, except for one story early on. Our anthologies are a mix. Sometimes they're just open competition, open submission based. Sometimes they're open to a limited audience, that is, writers that I've worked with before and have some faith in them. That's because they've been somewhat unusual in concept. They tend to focus on some part of the writing process. So it's a limited submission-based approach, I guess I'd say. We've got some questions now in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and go to those. Jerry, I'll get to you then after we've done those, or you can put your question in the chat and we'll get to it then. Angelique has asked, when there's time, I'd love to hear what the editors do as day jobs. If they have them, it's always the dream to write or publish full time. Mine is I'm a foreign aid consultant on anti-corruption programs. In fact, that's what I'm doing for the rest of the month, is writing a proposal for a USAID project.
That is a cool job.
It's an interesting job. People always say, well, anti-corruption, why aren't you working here in the US? And that's a very good question. Holly, what's yours? What's your day job?
Yeah, so I work at Rice University, and I help coordinate the Religious Studies Review Journal. I am not a religious studies background, but I do like the proofreading, kind of managing the editors behind the scenes, that kind of stuff. So it's very similar to the work I do at Interstellar Flight Press.
Okay, Justine.
There we go. I'm actually fortunate enough right now that this is my full-time job. I don't make a whole lot at it because we're new, but my partner does well, and so I'm doing my best to try and put everything I have into growing the magazine and the press for at least as long as my partner will put up with me not bringing in a lot of money.
That is the key.
Selena, do you have a day job?
I do. I am a teacher, so I teach at university. I usually am teaching a first-year humanities writing and research course. I also occasionally teach creative writing and a science fiction course, which is really fun. Occasionally, when I'm not working at the university, I occasionally also teach high school. The dream is absolutely to be able to do Stelliform full time. I do love some of my teaching work, but not all of it. So I would love to be able to pare that down and have more editing work as well. Some people might notice that Stelliform sometimes is publishing during a certain time of the year, and teachers would probably recognize that as related to when I'm doing my marking, when I'm doing my prep. And yeah, so the teaching really does affect when I can do Stelliform work. And I would love to be able to focus more on that for sure.
Okay, great. Justine, a question for you from Stephen. Stephen, you're here. Go ahead and ask your question directly.
I just wanted to a definition of Solarpunk. It's, as an author, I want to know what it is I'm trying to write for.
Yeah, I don't know how helpful this will be, but the definition we use, generally speaking, is Solarpunk is a movement in literature, art, and activism, architecture, that seeks to essentially answer the question of how we build a sustainable society and how we get to that point. That's pretty vague. A little bit more specifically for Solarpunk magazine in particular, I mean, we obviously stories that are hopeful and futuristic. We're not super picky about whether they're like near future or distant future. But we like stories, of course, that like focus on people and like the human problems that exist in like a more utopian state. And then also a focus on climate change and some sort of solution to climate change. It doesn't need to be like a big global solution that is like ending climate change and making the whole world better. It can be something that's very local and specific to a family or a community. But sort of those kind of elements, right? Like a human story, some sort of technology that's helping solve or helping people adapt to climate change. And I mean, I think that's sort of the gist of it, right? Kind of like climate change driven backdrop, and then looking at how characters are going about adapting to that reality or trying to change it.
Okay. Shan, you had a question about the Festival of Literary Diversity, which I admit I haven't heard of, so I guess that's my answer.
Yes, there's the Festival of Literary Diversity. It's an amazing festival, and it's going to be taking place the end of April, I believe, beginning of May. I know that's where I first encountered Stelliform Press, so I was wondering if any of the other publishers are going to be there.
As I said, I'm not, because I haven't heard of it, but I'll look into it. Holly.
Yeah, that's the first I'm hearing of it, but it sounds really cool. And anywhere like Stelliform is at is probably good. So
Justine?
Yeah, same answer. Never heard of it, but I mean, assuming that it's online or not super far away, then I don't see why I wouldn't go. It sounds really cool just by the name of it.
Well, Selena, you're the one who's been. Tell us your experience about it.
Yeah, so the Festival of Literary Diversity is a Canadian literary festival. I'm not actually sure whether they've ever had any American publishers or anyone who's not Canadian. That would definitely be something to look into. But during the pandemic, they did a few years in person out of a small city called Brampton in Ontario. And the lineup for the festival was just absolutely amazing. I had such a good time the 2 years that I was there in person. They did switch to online during the pandemic, and found that they were able to, provide panels and just move pretty seamlessly into the online space, and it was great for accessibility. So they're continuing with that online festival, and I believe this year they also have some in-person events. So last year was the first time that Stelliform was part of the Festival of Literary Diversity, and we were online. They have a really neat online sort of conference software called vFairs, and it allows you to sort of move through the space to different booths. That's kind of like, well, not quite like Second Life or anything like that, but a similar idea. And so we had a little booth set up, and we had people come and talk to us at our booth and check out our videos and sample texts that we had up. And it was a really nice way to connect with people. And I'm really looking forward to it again this year because we are looking for Canadian writers, especially right now, because of our funding model. If we can acquire more Canadian works, then we'll be able to publish more books without me having to pay for them. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to connecting with Canadian writers at Fold.
All right.
Selena, are there like granting in Canada? Is that what you're talking about with the funding?
Yeah. So Canada has quite a robust artistic grant system. Often you can get it at the provincial level, so I can apply for grants in Ontario where I live. I can also apply for national grants through the Canada Council for the Arts. So it really depends on how much Canadian content you're publishing. So for the first couple of years of Stelliform, we were publishing mostly American authors and so weren't eligible for grants. But now that we have a few Canadians, we are eligible, and I'm hoping to ramp that up and be able to get more grants for the press.
That's something I'm really interested in, Selena, because I'm Canadian. I'm from Oxford.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah.
I'm from Aurelia, so I know exactly where that is.
Oh, you're close. Well, then then you really know where I'm from. I'm from Eudora, Pefferlaw.
Okay, yeah, I know where that is for sure.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, so I'd love to learn more about you, all the funding out there available for authors and publishing.
Yeah, if you want to send me an email, my email is on the Stelliform site, stelliform.press, and I'd be happy to talk about it.
Okay, let's do it. Thank you.
Awesome.
I'm interested to hear the name Aurelia. I have to say I'm not too up on Canadian geography, but Aurelia, isn't that where Gordon Lightfoot is from?
It is, yeah.
Oh,
That's the extent of my knowledge.
Beautiful name.
Jerry, you've had your hand up for a while.
Thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So this has been a great discussion. Can I first ask, is it Selena who mentioned a wonderful story that was in Clark's World, and you're publishing that author, Rebecca? And I wanted to write down the story to read it before I go on.
Sorry, my phone cut out for the last part of that question. So can you repeat?
Rebecca Campbell's original story in Clark's World.
It's an important failure.
Oh, okay. I want to look that up and read it. It sounds wonderful.
Jerry, I can't say enough about the novella that turned into, Arboreality, that Stelliform published as well. I just think it's fantastic. So.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I have a different question than those first two questions. It's the opposite, really. I write a lot of Solarpunk, not all, but I try to make my Solarpunk have be a little more lighthearted. I mean, I hope are characters that people are really interested in, and they have problems that are believable, and it's set in a future that shows some cooperation about struggling to adapt to the climate crisis in their community, but they're a little more lighthearted. And when I read all the magazines, I find most of the stories overall are a little bit on the grim side. And so I'm wondering, what happened to humor? There you go. There's another Canadian. There you go. That's my question to everybody.
Well, let's start with Justine on that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know what happened to it. I mean, I don't know the answer is in terms of like how it sort of fell off the trend scale or whatever, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a lack of humor, it seems, especially in short stories, but maybe not so much novels. But I mean, I can't put my finger on like a sci-fi or fantasy novel that I would consider like a comedy, or even like put it in that genre really in any way. I mean, what our poetry editor at Solarpunk magazine, and he's also one of our book editors at Android Press, is really into comedy and asks the same question and is like eternally frustrated because no one will accept his funny sci-fi stuff. So I would definitely encourage you to send it to Solarpunk magazine, because that's at least there are editors there who would be sympathetic to the question, and especially since it's Solarpunk anyway, that might work. And then Optopia 2 is another outlet that publishes quite a bit of Solarpunk that would probably be interested in some more lighthearted stuff.
Thanks. And you're right about any novels that are a bit lighthearted that are Solarpunk.
Sorry?
And I think you're right that I haven't read any novels that consider themselves Solarpunk that are a little bit on the lighthearted side.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be great to see.
Holly, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, we published a novella called The Future Second by Second, which I would say is like a hope punk-esque, I call it a cozy post-apocalyptic. So, you know, it's not really humor necessarily. I'll get to that question, but you know, it's like a softer community-based kind of, you know, everything wraps up happily at the end type book. And like, I really love it, and I love pitching it at when I'm selling, like, you know, at cons, because people really like the idea of it. And so I think there's a lot of space for that. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of space. And comedy, like, I really love well done speculative comedy. I was just talking to a poet in one of my workshops. It's interesting that you bring up poetry, Justine, because I think there's a lot of like comedy in the speculative poetry scene that is really great. So this person in my workshop had written this series of poems inspired by the Roman poet Martial, who has these like snarky epigrams that like kind of poke fun at people, and she had written some that were like kind of politically adjacent, you know, poking fun at the, you know, Republican majority and stuff. And I was like, you have to send these as a book to IFP, because they also had some like speculative, and I was like, I love these. And there's just not enough really well done comedy. I think some of it gets a little bit too like slapsticky, you know, like, and I see stuff in my submission pile that I'm like, oh, if that was just like toned like a little, you know, like there's like an edge where you're like, we don't want to be into the like weird too I don't know, inappropriate comedy, or like that's what I get, and I'm like, I don't want that. I want it to be like smart and witty. And it's frustrating because like a lot of the really successful books do have like sort of a little bit of comedy and banter and, you know, between characters and stuff. And honestly, like I think that's why I love young adult books so much, is they're way more likely to have some comedy in them. So yeah, I don't have an answer as to like why that's the way it is, but I think a lot of editors are really interested in it if it's like done well and successful. Yeah.
Thanks.
Selena.
Comedy is so tricky because something that is funny for one person might not be for another. So often it does come down to the taste of the editor. And I admit that comedy is not what I immediately reach for often, like in my own reading, like personal reading that I do. I tend towards the darker stories, but I will say that for the press, I am looking for some lighter stuff and would welcome some, as Holly said, like very smart, witty comedy. I've been doing a lot of hand selling at cons over the last year, and I see people looking for lighter stories, and I would like to bring more of those stories into the Stelliform catalog as well. We do have some books that are, you know, have tinges of comedy, but I wouldn't call them like sci-fi comedy. Weird Fishes, which we published in 2022, is sort of an underwater adventure story with this odd couple pairing of a selkie and an octopus, and the banter between them is just like absolutely chef's kiss, sometimes hilarious and very witty. And that's one of the things that I really loved about that novella and definitely sold it to me. And then we have the one that we just released on March 1st, Feast for the Swarm, which is also very funny, sometimes goofy, and with that same sort of fast-paced, rollicking feel that often goes with more comedic text. So yeah, we do definitely have some of that in our catalog, but I would love to get some more in there.
Thanks, everyone.
For Metaphorosis, we don't really do Solarpunk as a specific theme. I'm not against Solarpunk, but We do publish the occasional humorous story, and there's certainly some humorous work out there. I think more in fantasy maybe than in science fiction, at least at the longer lengths. For anthologies, obviously there's UFO, unidentified funny object, that's been coming out every year. But it's hard to do. I think everybody has pretty much said that from the panel. It's very hard to hit the right balance of humor and seriousness for each author. I get a lot of things that think they're funny, and they're just not funny enough. And it's hard to fix sometimes. So I'd certainly like to see more funny work, but I think it's a very, very difficult thing to do. Angelique, you had a question for Justine about the solicitation list.
Yes, Justine. So how does one become somebody on your list? I'm now learning that there's sort of like, I just learned the other day that some of the bigger magazines have calls that are open all the time for authors they're used to working for, and then there's open submissions for the rest of us. I want to stop being the rest of us and be on the.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at Solarpunk magazine, we don't actually have a list of authors that we solicit from. It's sort of just mostly at my whim. That said, I mean, I guess there's no formal list, but I mean, it doesn't mean that there's not like a group of people in my head who I would think about. So I mean, I would say, I mean, first of all, I mean, I have to have read your stuff, right? If I'm not familiar with your writing, then you won't come to mind. So I guess the first step would be just to submit to the magazine.
I submitted a few times, but I think it was all too dark because you came and talked to us at the Dreamcasters, and I'm oh, I had it all wrong. And then now I'm learning what Solarpunk is.
Too dark would definitely be an issue. Also, I mean, you're here and now, so feel free to just shoot me links or some PDFs or whatever of some stories you've written. Because generally I don't read for Solarpunk magazine. We have a fiction department and a poetry department, and I do this stuff and layouts and marketing and other stuff. That said, if you send me stuff and we like it, then we can certainly expand our list. Yeah.
All right.
I'll put my email in the chat.
Shan, you had a question about indigenous futurisms.
Yeah, I gotta find it now. I was wondering if any of you look specifically for indigenous futurisms or stories that are based on indigenous traditions and storytelling.
I'll start off because my answer is easy. No, we don't really have any particular themes that we look for. I'm certainly open to that, but it's not something that we actively look for because we don't actively look for anything beyond style, really. So, Holly.
I would love to see like poetry or a novella that is in that frame of experience, because it's not something I see a lot in our submission pile. We're always kind of working to try to have all kinds of different identities represented in what we're doing, and so like I would love to see anything on that take. Yeah.
Selena.
Yeah, 100%. We have published some indigenous futurism already. So Weird Fishes is a kind of Hawaiian futurism written by Ray Maurice, and that one draws from Hawaiian mythology and some sort of theoretical thinking by Hawaiian scholars. And it really adds to the depth of the story, I think, and I'm really, really keen on that. We have another one coming out in July, and then in October. So actually, three of our books will be Indigenous futurist, and we're definitely looking for more as well.
Justine.
I have so can you clarify this for me? Is it Indigenous the same as Aboriginal, or does Indigenous just mean native to whatever you're speaking of? I asked that because I tried to put a native character in one of my stories, and I have a lot of native friends, and she's like, you cannot do that. That's not own voices, and they're very they want to tell their own stories. They don't want somebody like me telling the story of Canadian Aboriginal people. I didn't know if any of you can address that, because I find that something, you know, with the own voices, I want to not offend anybody and tread very carefully about how we portray others or how we try and tell stories that aren't our own. And I actually don't know where the path is right now as an author.
Yeah, I can answer. Go ahead, Selena.
Okay, so as far as like, we've received some stories in our submissions periods where we had a white author who had written an Indigenous main character, and I wouldn't say that is 100% always a no-no. I think it is possible for that to be done well and properly, but there are a lot of protocol issues in Indigenous communities that white people just aren't aware of, and there's really no way for them to become aware of it unless they are somehow admitted into that community. So it's very difficult, I think, for a person outside of that community to be able to tell an Indigenous story. Now, as far as the terminology goes, I can only speak for Canadian, the Canadian context. And as far as I'm aware, Aboriginal is a word that we don't really use here anymore. It was sort of a word that was used by the government to describe certain communities and governmental policy around those communities. And now I believe Indigenous is the word that people prefer. Some individuals might prefer a different term.
Justine?
I can talk
ahead,
a little
Shannon.
bit to that too. I am a mix of, Mi'kmaq and European ancestry. And the preference is to actually speak to the people as per their nation. So rather than saying Indigenous, when at all applicable, you would say Anishinaabe or Métis or whatever the actual nation of the people would be. If you're talking about them as a generality, there would be Indigenous peoples. So that would be the preferred term.
Justine, did you have more to add?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that it's from what I've gathered from folks I've talked to, I think as a white person writing like an Indigenous or a BIPOC main character, potentially definitely problematic, not necessarily like Selena said, but I mean I probably wouldn't do it. That said, like there should also be characters in stories that aren't white, even if you're a white author, right? Like, I mean, I feel like it would be more racist for your world to be lily white with no people of color because you're afraid to write characters that aren't white, right? And so it's about, I think, striking a balance of having a realistic world and a diverse world in your story, but also not co-opting the stories of cultures that European white cultures have dominated and oppressed, and then sort of using those, and turning them into our own stories. So yeah.
If I can add just
all right, go ahead, Selena.
Okay, so expanding a little bit on what Justine was talking about, and this idea of a lily white world and populating a story with people of color and Indigenous people, I do think that that's extremely important. And I've gone through editorial processes with a couple of my authors where I was really questioning, like, so a lot of our stories are dealing with people adapting to certain conditions on a specific land. And a lot of the time the question comes up for me, well, where are the indigenous people on this land? Like, where did they go? Why aren't they here? And sometimes through that discussion, we have decided to make sure that indigenous people are represented in that world and engaged with the problems of that world. And that has always turned out really well for the stories, and I really.
Selena, you've cut out. Selena's in the middle of a storm, so she may have lost connectivity.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
Because here's the most important of all of these. So somebody said that they're loving this conversation. So this is, I do a lot of proofreading, right, through my writing groups. And something that drives me crazy personally is none of the white characters are described as white, but then a Black woman sits down or an Asian person comes to the door. And then I feel, it feels so uncomfortable for me because I'm like, well, why didn't you say a white woman sat down? Why is it? I'm not sure that we should be trying so hard to make sure things look like we're representing everybody, but then it almost feels so white to point out it's a Black person. It's and then I feel uncomfortable. And then I'm like, I'm not sure what the correct way to do that is either. I mean, my solution has been to try and write as though anybody could be any color or any description, but then it's their cuisine or their cultural activities that you can guess what their ethnicity is.
That's actually a great way to do it by itself, is like, showing through cultural activities rather than telling us that they're Black, white, or whatever, somewhere in between, brown, whatever other colors we assign to people's skin. Also, I think, really, the way, other than that, what I like to see the most is just like really subtle in passing descriptions, right? Like, you're describing something else about them as like part of like a dialogue tag or something. And, you mentioned that, oh, it's, the light skinned hand or, their dark skin was goose pimpled or whatever. But then, definitely, well, maybe not definitely, but I think it's good to try and stay away from things like, describing people of colors, skin tones based on like types of food and like things that sort of like objectify marginalized communities, skin color, sexuality, or things like that. So I think the more kind of subtle and just like, get it out there. Sure, you want people to know that like your world is diverse, but I don't feel like there's a need to like dwell on describing people's skin color. It's enough just to kind of know where they're from, however you can get that across.
Holly,
I wanted to add a resource that might be helpful, which is this workshop called Writing the Other. It is a really fantastic workshop. They have classes that go on throughout the year that are usually available via Zoom. And they have all kinds of classes like what is cultural appropriation and how to avoid it is one that I'm looking at on their website right now. And so it's a very useful resource. They also have a book that I think talks about these questions. And I think I'm not a person of color, but I think that it's not my place to tell how people of color might react to certain things. So I think that's why I recommend this resource, because it's very much people teaching from their experience. And so it's, I think it would be really useful to check that out. I would say how we handle this at Interstellar Flight Press is that we usually work really hard to have writers of color as our guest editors. So when we do a submission call, we have a guest editor, and we also have a team of slush readers who are from all sorts of backgrounds, and are very, helpful to me in when we're reading submissions, pointing out, this could use work, or this feels inauthentic. And often I go to them for sort of similar to like a sensitivity read. I'll have them read a book for me and give me their experience on, what things need improving, because I feel like I'm not the person to be the expert on that, even though I have the role of being the editor and having to make these decisions. And I think that is why a lot of times editors prefer to take submissions from someone who is writing from personal experience, because we don't have that experience necessarily. And so we can't say, this is correctly done. And so, we have to rely on the writer's own experience in that case. And so I would also ask kind of why, I would say, ask yourself, why does this story matter to me? What about it am I drawn to? And why do I feel like I can tell this story? And kind of that maybe might help work through kind of why it matters and what the goal is there. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Selena, welcome back. You got dropped in the middle of something you were saying, so I don't know if you wanted to add more or.
I don't know exactly where I got dropped. I stopped talking and realized that nobody was responding to me. So I think maybe I'll just finish that thought with the idea that it is extremely problematic to have a world that doesn't include BIPOC characters, because if you think through the extrapolation of that idea is that they don't exist for whatever reason in that world. And I think a lot of writers don't intend that when they create a world without those characters, but it is definitely something that has been written about a lot in essays and scholarship around science fiction and fantasy. And yeah, it is very important to have representation in stories.
Jerry, you had your hand up for a while and it's down now. I'm not sure if your question was answered or you gave up or you still had a comment.
I'll get back to that. Where was I? Oh, I was just agreeing with everybody and love that resource that Holly just said. It's been a struggle for me too. And I had a story, light-hearted story in the last anthology by Grist Fix, Imagine 2200 climate fiction. And in it, a minor character is Anishinaabe. And I wanted to get it right. And I've been, of course you can say, I have friends. That's not enough. It's not enough. And you can read and do a lot of research. So I actually went out and found 4 Anishinaabe writers and asked them, would they be kind enough to read my short story? I'd be happy to give an honorarium or something, because I really wanted to make sure that I was being, that I was getting it right. And I would never, and that was a big help to me. And I'm still, I guess in my future too, I would like to think that Anishinaabe and from around here, Haudenosaunee people, were in government and that they were running things more and they had more roles of honor. So I want them in my future. And so it's a balance. It's definitely a balance. And I'm looking forward to taking that that workshop that Holly mentioned, writing the other, because I think it is really critical that you are respectful. And I was really glad to hear that Holly uses guest editors to check on it. I actually have an adult child who's also an author and wrote, I don't know if you've heard of it, Girl of Feather and Steel. And anyway, it's a fantasy young adults, and one of the characters is Black, and my adult child is not Black, and they asked for an editor who was Black, and Dundurn Press wouldn't get one, and they will never go to Dundurn Press again. We're like, that's the only thing I'm asking for. It's critical. So I'm really glad that this discussion has come up, because I think it is really important that our stories are populated with diverse people, but we aren't taking their culture. We're not writing from their point of view. We're not assuming that we can understand the generations that of experience that have made them who they are individually. You know, it's such an individual thing. So So I think being aware of all that is a big help.
Shan, shifting gears a little bit, I think you had a question about Lunarpunk, and I don't know what that is.
Oh, yeah. Lunarpunk is kind of like Solarpunk, but I think it's more witchy and pagan. So I'm curious if any of you folks looking for Lunarpunk too.
I'll start with my usual answer, which is that we don't look for themes in particular, so happy to see it, but it's not something necessarily that we'd actively look for.
We do. Android Press and Solarpunk magazine. We did a whole issue last November for Solarpunk magazine that was all Lunarpunk. And then we even had a Lunarpunk story in our January issue that recently came out. And at Android Press, we just put out a Lunarpunk anthology that has stories by like Starhawk and Neil Gaiman and Serena Ulibarri, Wendy Wagner from Nightmare magazine. And then later this year, we're putting out a YA Lunarpunk novel by J. Diane Dotson that's called The Inn at the Amethyst Lantern. So we're definitely, I mean, just as much as Solarpunk, I think, open to Lunarpunk at both the book press and the magazine.
Holly or Selena?
I would love to see that. That's like one of my favorite, anything sort of like witchy I'm into. We have a lot of feminist focused books that we publish, and I would absolutely love someone to send me an article at Interstellar Flight magazine about that genre. Like that would be so cool, just because I think it's sort of like, I think people are sort of aware of Solarpunk, but not as aware of that. And it would be very cool to kind of have someone write about it. So yeah.
Hey, Holly, I'll shoot you an email. I've done quite a bit of writing on it already.
Yeah, I would love that. We're always looking for, we do short little, like, maybe 800 word
Sure.
articles. And so I'm always interested in like speculative explorations of genre. Kind of, yeah, it's cool.
Selena, did you have any?
Yes. Yeah, Stelliform Press is definitely 100% on board for Lunarpunk. Like Holly, I really love the witchy stuff, and I love it especially when it is like a spirituality tied to the land, kind of like it, as you might find in folk horror or folk tales in general. Yeah, so that combined with the more technological approach of the various punks is something that I would love to see more of.
I generally try to keep these sessions to about an hour, which is roughly where we stand now. So I'm going to say no more new questions, but let's go through the ones that are already on the chat, and then we'll finish after that. And if people have to drop off earlier, that's fine, of course. Shan, still with you, you had asked about mythological and historical cli-fi.
Yeah, I'm currently working on a cli-fi story that takes place in the ancient mythological past, and I'm wondering what kind of interest there is in historical or mythological cli-fi, because everything I'm seeing has been futuristic.
Selena, let's start with you.
Sorry, Shane, can you repeat the question? I'm cutting out again.
Oh, sure, no problem. I'm working on a cli-fi story that takes place in the ancient mythological past, and almost everything that I've been seeing has been looking future forward. So what kind of interest is there for historical or mythological cli-fi?
Hmm. I have received a few sort of ancient mythological historical stories in Slush, and in general that hasn't entirely worked because the connection between our situation right now with climate change and that mythological story hasn't been as tight as I would like it. But I'm always open to the possibility of that working for us, as long as that connection is clear. And that is something that I would be like, if the concept was something that was intriguing enough for me, I would be willing to work with an author in order to make those connections a little bit more apparent. But yeah, so I'm open, but in the past, that kind of thing hasn't entirely worked for stealth.
Justine.
Yeah, historical type sci-fi I've generally steered away from, just as, I mean, I read it, but I mean, for the press, just as a preference for stuff that's forward looking. That said, Solarpunk magazine, if what you're writing is a short story, as opposed to a longer form, Solarpunk magazine's September issue is themed Solarpunk myth. So I think even if it was set in the past, a cli-fi mythological story would definitely be something that we would be interested in for that particular issue. But again, if what you're writing is a short story as opposed to a novella or novel or whatever.
Holly.
Yeah, I mean, I really like historical speculative literature. I don't think I've gotten a lot of ones that have worked really, like, and I think that the cli-fi historical would be very cool. I haven't seen anything like that in my slush pile, but I would love to read it. Yeah, it sounds really cool.
Then I think the last question we have is from Stephen. Stephen, if you want to ask that about AI written stories, and that's a long and complicated topic that I don't think we'll be able to go into too much. That's probably 2 or 3 sessions on its own. And I'll post a link to an article by Metaphorosis, which quotes from some of the SFF editors. But Stephen, why don't you go ahead and ask your question, and then we'll go around and see what we got.
Yeah, the recent Clerks World incident where they suddenly were inundated with AI generated stories. I was wondering if the editors are doing anything to help get around that, and what plans do they have for the future in relationship to AI?
I guess I'll jump in. So yeah, I mean, at Solarpunk magazine, we definitely saw what we're pretty sure were AI submissions in our most recent submission, which was in January. That was the first one where we really noticed it. I mean, Chat GPT kind of just became like a big thing kind of at the end of last year or beginning of this year. It existed before that, but we've definitely seen it. At this point, it's still, I mean, they're still bad enough that, I mean, fiction wise, at least, that like, unless an author is doing some serious work after the AI fact, then it's just going to be a bad story, bad form, bad, all kinds of different things that are not going to put it into, on your short list anyway. So it hasn't, we've gotten nowhere near the number of or the kind of inundation that Clarkesworld has gotten. I mean, you know, they're probably the biggest magazine, they pay the best. So I think it makes sense that they're sort of the target of these folks. But we have seen the uptick, and I mean, I honestly expect that it will only be a matter of months before it has improved enough that we can't really tell the difference so well anymore. And we've played around with, I think it's called Chat Zero, which is like Chat GPT's AI detection program, and it's not super reliable. So it's hard to say what we're gonna end up doing. I mean, we definitely don't want to pay people just for like typing a prompt into a machine and then having a machine spit a story out. But how we're going to detect it once it becomes a much better, I'm not sure. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that yet, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Selena? Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Selena.
Holly.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, like we haven't seen that, but like our last submission call started last like September. So like we haven't had a submission call since, you know, this big sort of conversation. And I think we will not be as targeted as like say Clarkesworld, because, you know, they're always open to submissions and they have a really high pay rate, and they've been sort of targeted by what seems like this group of like YouTube AI bros who are like pushing this idea that you can use it. I sort of feel like already we're seeing that these AI tools are introducing a cost and subscription model. So I think we're going to see that it becomes costly for people to use that software, and so they decide it's not worthwhile. That's what I think will eventually happen. That being said, like we are not going to introduce submission fees. We're not going to introduce barriers to submission that might be difficult, you know, for writers who don't have the money to like pay for AI and stuff. I like Justine, I don't know what we will do if it becomes like, you know, hard enough to like tell apart. I think it sort of reinforces to me the importance of a writer having a website and sort of an online presence, even if you haven't like written a lot, or maybe you're just blogging, because it helps us to be able to go look you up and, you know, tell, are you committed to being a writer? Do you have like, you know, even if it's under a pseudonym, let's say, do you have that kind of online presence? It's, even if you're just starting, I always recommend writers to, you know, have a website, have links to your published works so that we can go look at your past stuff. And I think this reinforces that. So yeah, we'll see on our next submission call if it is a thing. I don't know what it'll be, but I have no intention of introducing any kind of like barrier, or, you know, barrier to submission, or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Selena.
I can repeat a lot of what Justine and Holly have said on this issue. We haven't been open for submissions since the end of 2021. So far we've missed any AI submissions. I've seen them in my teaching day job, but not for Stelliform yet. Now I'm hoping that Stelliform is specific enough, and we don't generally take short stories. We're looking for more long form work. So I'm hoping that it stays, you know, fairly apparent if we do get those submissions that it is AI for a while anyway. But yeah, like Holly said, we're not thinking of submission fees at all. We want to remain accessible to people all over the world, and submission fees are definitely a barrier to that. Yeah, so we have introduced some additional clauses into our contracts that we give to writers that we're intending to publish, just, you know, so that they are vouching for the fact that they have not used AI in the production of their work. In in return, we don't saddle them with an AI cover. We're pretty committed to working with human authors and human artists in the press. So yeah, I guess at this point, it's just like seeing how it goes and whether we will be affected in a similar way to what Clarkesworld is seeing, which I doubt because of who we are and who Clarkesworld is, but we're just keeping an eye on it.
I put a link to the article by Metaphorosis at the bottom of the chat, and that I think covers a lot of what I feel about the solutions. I haven't seen a solution to this that will work, that wouldn't have an unfortunate effect on legitimate authors. So I haven't. I don't think we'll be doing any of the things that people have suggested. On the other hand, I don't have a problem necessarily with AI written fiction. Our job, as I see it, is to provide good, entertaining stories to the audience and whoever they're written by. That said, I haven't yet seen an AI written story that is very good. You can get apparently some pretty good writing out of it, but it takes so many iterations and so much work that it just strikes me that you'd be better off just writing it yourself, which would be easier, faster, and better in all sorts of ways. So there's that. Yeah, I guess I'd leave it at that. We're open all the time, much like Clarkesworld, but obviously we don't have anywhere near the appeal and prestige that Clarkesworld does, so we haven't seen that problem. The other thing that, from our side, I'm a very, very hands-on editor. Every story that we publish has gone through anywhere between 3 and 10 rounds of revision, and at least at this point, I don't believe that. Or rather, I should say, I believe that I'm able to distinguish between somebody who keeps shoving my comments into the AI and saying, fix this the way he said to, and an author who's really doing their own work. I think that difference is pretty evident, and the AI-based author would give up pretty quickly. So because of the model that we use, I think we're a little bit insulated from this, at least for the time being. We'll see how the AI thing evolves over the years. That's pretty much it for the questions that we have in the chat. Thanks to everybody for being here. I want to give all the panelists one last chance to comment and to plug anything that they have coming up. For Metaphorosis, we've got an anthology coming out in April called Museum Piece, which is SFF stories about interesting museums. It's been a lot of fun to put together, and so I urge you to look for that. It looks like Selena has dropped out again. So Holly, let's go with you.
Yeah, our next book that I've been working on that should be up for pre-order soon is Beautiful Malady, which is Beautiful Malady by Ennis Rookbash, and that is a queer disability poetry book. So I'm excited about that. And then Maxwell Gladstone's And Other Mythology, which I mentioned earlier, which is a prose poetry collection, queer retellings of myths. They both just happen to be queer writers. I'm not sure how I managed that, but I'm excited about it. And then we are always open to magazine article submissions. So if you want to review a book or review short stories or write about any of the things we've talked about, feel free to send them my way. I'm always looking for those. We are always open to long form nonfiction book submissions. So academic style books or anything that's sort of like a book length exploration of these genres that we've been talking about. We're always open to submissions for that. And I don't know when we'll be doing our next like novella, fiction, poetry submission call, but keep an eye out because it'll probably be later this year or into next year. So yeah.
Okay, Justine.
March 14th, we will put out our 8th issue of Solarpunk magazine. So look for that. And our submission windows are the first 2 weeks of every other month. So we're currently in the middle of a submission window that's just for BIPOC authors and artists. Our next big general window when anyone can submit will be the first 2 weeks of May. At Android Press, we're currently open for novellas and novels, but we're going to be closing pretty soon. So if you have any interest in submitting a novel or novella, you should probably do it within the next month or so. And then we've got a poetry book coming out next month by Mariska Pachette. We have a Solarpunk novella coming out next month, and then also next month we have a Kickstarter that is starting for a cyberpunk solarpunk anthology RPG, like combined. Use the stories in the anthology as inspiration for setting and plot for missions in the game. So look for that. It's going to be fun.
Selena did say that her phone cut out, so I'm sorry we didn't get last words from her. Holly, before we close, I see that Chen has asked what is the best way to contact you. So if you have.
Yeah, I'll put the email in the chat. It's contact@Interstellar Flight Press. Yeah, feel free to email me if you have questions or anything. Always happy to chat.
Okay, great. Well, thanks to all the panelists again, and thanks to all of you for joining. I appreciate it. We'll do another one of these on the first Saturday of April.
Thank you.